Military buildup in northern Ethiopia. The Ethiopian federal government has begun a military buildup near Tigray region in the aftermath of recent clashes, indicating preparations for an expanded and prolonged war in northern Ethiopia. Anti-federal government outlet Amhara War Updates and an independent journalist have reported that the Ethiopian National Defense Force, ENDF, is redeploying a large number of forces from the Amhara and Oromia regions toward Tigray since February 7th. The Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, also accused the ENDF of military preparations and operations in Tigray on February 9th. The troop movements come after the Tigray Defense Forces, TDF, the TPLF's military force, launched offensives against the ENDF and allied Amhara militia fighters in northwestern and southern Tigray in late January, marking the first large-scale hostilities between the federal government and TPLF since the end of the Tigray War in 2022. The TDF pushed the ENDF and its militia allies out of disputed territory near the Amhara border before withdrawing from these seized areas in northwestern Tigray. TDF and TIA head-to-desk worried cited the federal government's failure to implement the 2022 Pretoria peace agreement that ended the Tigray War, particularly the continued displacement of Tigrayans and presence of Amhara forces in the disputed areas, as the reason for the offensives. 5 Worried did state that large-scale clashes should not have happened, and that the TIA wants to avoid war. However, amid other efforts from the TPLF to de-escalate the situation. 6. Eritrea is almost certainly already providing support to the TPLF and would be involved in a wider war in Tigray. Eritrea has formed an alliance of convenience with the TPLF since early 2025, despite their historic animosity. Eritrea and Ethiopia put aside their decades-long rivalry and fought on the same side against the TPLF in the Tigray War. The Pretoria peace process excluded Eritrea. However, and Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has since made several thinly veiled threats to annex Eritrea's port of Assab. Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki promised to protect the TPLF in the event of a conflict with Ethiopia in early 2025 during one of several high-level meetings between Eritrean and TPLF officials, according to French outlet Africa Intelligence. Eritrea reportedly may have provided intelligence support for the TPLF's de facto coup against the TIA in March 2025 and the TDF's recent offensives in northwestern and southern Tigray. 9. An Ethiopian military official told the Africa Report on February 11th that Eritrean forces have infiltrated Tigray and established positions along key roads. 10. The TPLF has previously confirmed its desire to bolster ties with Eritrea and left open the possibility of an alliance in a conflict against Ethiopia, but denied ongoing military coordination. 2025 Year in Review, East Africa File. Sudan. The Rapid Support Forces, RSF, currently holds the momentum in Sudan civil war after a promising start to the year for the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, with a showdown for Central Sudan now looming heading into 2026. The Sudanese civil war had 3 phases in 2025. 1. A groundbreaking Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, offensive from January to May. 2. An effective Rapid Support Forces, RSF, counteroffensive that halted the SAF advance by July. 3. And an RSF dry season offensive that has consolidated of the de facto partition of Sudan and centered in Central Sudan from October onwards. The SAF's offensive enabled the military to retake Khartoum and Omdurman capital areas, twin cities, and advance toward Western Sudan. The RSF launched a counteroffensive in April that eventually established the current front lines around El Obeid, the SAF's headquarters in Central Sudan. The RSF has since captured all major population centers in western and west-central Sudan, including cities like El Fasher that the RSF had besieged for the majority of the war. The RSF's recent advances have caused both warring parties to concentrate their efforts on three axes around El Obeid, setting the stage for a potentially decisive battle for the city before the rainy season begins in late spring 2026. U.S.-led Quad peace efforts with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates intensified in the second half of 2025 amid an onslaught of human rights violations by both Sudanese factions, including a likely RSF genocide in El Fasher of at least 60,000 people. Continued external backing of the warring parties, including Quad members and others' continued provision of drones and other advanced weaponry, has obstructed progress and continued to fuel the war. However, Ethiopia. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's ambitions for Ethiopia to be the predominant power in the Horn of Africa sharply contrast with an emerging anti-Ethiopia regional bloc and increasing domestic turmoil in 2025. Abiy inaugurated the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, and escalated calls for Ethiopia to obtain access to the sea, with both projects integral to Abiy's broader vision of regional supremacy. Eritrea and Ethiopia have mobilized along their border in response, sparking fears of a regional war, while Egypt, Eritrea, Somalia, and the SAF-backed Sudanese government have broadly increased cooperation in response to the perceived threats that the GERD and Ethiopia's sea ambitions pose. The Pretoria peace agreement in Tigray continued to face severe challenges in 2025, with hardline Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, factions launching a de facto coup against the federal government-backed Tigray interim administration in March. The federal government and TPLF have since escalated their rhetoric and action against each other, leaving the TPLF to align with Eritrea and the Pretoria Agreement at risk of collapse. The federal government has also dealt with an escalating Amhara ethno-nationalist Fano insurgency, which has only furthered the divide between Ethiopia's regional ambitions and the internal stressors challenging the federal government. Somalia. The Somali federal government faced military and political setbacks throughout 2025, including al-Shabaab overturning nearly all gain from a landmark, U.S.-backed offensive in central Somalia in 2022, and deteriorating ties with multiple federal member states. Relations between the Somali federal government, SFG, and the Jubaland and Puntland state governments and Somali opposition sharply deteriorated in 2025 after the SFG went ahead with plans to hold direct elections for the upcoming 2026 federal elections, which would upend the power-sharing dynamics of Somalia's current quota-based system. Opposition factions responded by establishing the Somali Future Council political coalition to obstruct the SFG's implementation of the reforms, setting the stage for disputed and violent elections, diminished Mogadishu influence in pro-opposition states, and possibly even a parallel government. The growing divide came amid an al-Shabaab offensive in central Somalia and U.S.-backed anti-Islamic State Somalia Province, ISS, campaign in northern Somalia. Al-Shabaab relinked its support zones in central Somalia to its heartland in southern Somalia, positioning the group to increase pressure on Mogadishu. Puntland forces backed by the United States and United Arab Emirates have waged a successful campaign against ISS in northern Somalia, however, which has significantly degraded but not defeated ISIS.